Hey guys, welcome back to the Engine 25 Reviews YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be talking about The Green Knight with a guy I've known for a long time. Um, he's a teacher up north, or formerly a teacher up north. Before we get to that, I just want to remind everyone that if you like this video, hit that subscribe button. It's right here. It's actually down below, but it's right there. Today like I said, today we're talking about The Green Knight with Daniel Singleton. How's it going? Dan earned a PhD in English with a specialization in film and media studies from the University of Rochester. He's taught courses in literature, film, media, and has written at several schools across the United States, including the University of Rochester, University of Iowa, State University of New York, Rockport. His scholarship has appeared in such journals as the Quarterly Review of Film and Video, Adaptation, and the South Atlantic Review. He's currently writing a book for SUNY Press about fan auteurs and contemporary Hollywood movies and TV shows. That's a fun little bit. Maybe we'll come back around to, because I feel like, for example, The Suicide Squad, directed by James Gunn, just came out, and I would say he's a fan and an auteur, and I'm not sure that's what that's referring to, but sounds pretty cool to me because I'm a big old dork. How you doing today, Dan?
Good, Brandon. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I will say, just a quick note, we were all ready to record, we tested everything, and the moment Dan tried to talk for the real one, it didn't work, and it's working now, and I'm excited about it.
Awesome.
Yes. But, no, yeah, so how's your movie viewing life been during the pandemic, Dan?
It's interesting. I feel like I have sort of I go through phases. There's a phase of several months to a year where I feel like I'm watching movies all the time, and then like I'll shift to video games, then I'll shift to books, then I'll shift to like TV, then I'll shift back to movies. And I found that during the pandemic, I was playing a lot of video games. And that was like all of 2020. And then once 2021 hit, I've gotten back into TV and movies. So I
Nice.
have only gotten out to a handful of movies in the theaters this year. And this was one of the few that I went and saw. And it was well worth the trip. It was definitely like a very worthy trip to the cinema.
This was this was the second movie I saw in 2020. The first one was Old. In my Shyamalan's Old about 2 weeks ago. Excuse me. This is a much better movie than that one is. But that was the first movie that I had seen in theaters since Pixar's Onward in like the first week of March 2020. Yeah. So I've been back to the theater a couple of times. I hope to be able to keep going, but things are escalating pretty fast around here, so it might be going back to streaming for a couple of months. But
luckily, all the stuff that's coming out in the next few months that I'm excited about, except for I think those two Ridley Scott movies, is gonna hit HBO Max. So
yeah. I just saw the trailer yesterday for Cry Macho by Clint Eastwood.
Oh, nice.
It looks pretty like it's like Western-ish. It's modern, but it's got a Western vibe, and it also reminded me a lot of Gran Torino, which is in the spectrum of Clint Eastwood works relatively recent, but it came out like when we were in high school. Anyway, as a grumpy old guy with a very different young man hanging out together kind of situation. So I'm definitely looking forward to that, and it's going to be on HBO Max unless something changes rapidly with that. Like it's still, I think there's about a 50% chance that they say Dune is just for theaters. But everything up until that point is almost certainly still the streaming and theater release schedule.
Right.
Yeah, so The Green Knight surprised me. I first saw the trailer a couple weeks ago, probably a little over a month ago, when whatever the most recent trailer came out. And then I watched it again on the big screen in front of Old. And it definitely intrigued me, right? I like high concept. I like high concept movies. I like the historical, medieval, even fantasy movies. I'm all about all of that kind of stuff. But when I sat down in the theater, I wasn't sure what to expect, and I got something very different, even than I anticipated based on the trailer. And I'm kind of mean that in like the best way that I can. What um but without I want to put up a spoiler warning, so let's keep it kind of general for the first chunk here. But how'd you like the Green Knight?
Oh, I loved it. I went into it knowing it sounds like we had similar experiences because I also went into it knowing very, very little. I watched. I don't even think I finished the trailer. I think I
Right.
threw up like half the trailer and was like, okay, yeah, this
Yeah,
is
I'm
enough.
sold. I don't need more.
I
And I
read.
and I've always liked Dev Patel too. Ever since um, well, I could have told you the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire one, Slumdog Millionaire.
Slumdog
Um,
Millionaire.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I same. I loved Slumdog Millionaire like 12 years ago when I saw it, and I hadn't seen him in anything that I can kind of recall since then. So it was sort of exciting just on that level. It's like, oh, I haven't seen this actor in a major movie in a while.
he did
Um,
Lion a couple of years ago. It was really good. And
oh,
then
that's right.
he was doing
Yeah.
TV for a while. Like if you ever watched The Newsroom, he was a big part on that. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. Right. Awesome. That's good to know that he's got other stuff that I can go check out. But anyway, this one, I mean, I saw part of the trailer. I read, like I skimmed the A.O. Scott review in the New York Times, and he sells it as Seven Seal meets Monty Python. I was like, well, I love both of those. So, like you, I'm a huge fan of like medieval movies. I go back, I dip in and out of fantasy, like, as, depending on the year and the season. So this was like exciting from that point of view. But I'm also just I was intrigued by it too because I do a lot of writing and research on adaptation and how adaptation works in media, and it's
and this
really
is
really interesting.
it's an adapted from a very very old like Arthurian legend, right? Do I have that right? And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
that kind of thing varies based on the translation even. So it's even only reading the original story, it could come out very different ways just based on who's telling it.
Right, right, exactly. And that's the interesting thing is like you're dealing with a very very old text which is been told and retold in many many different forms like over the series. I mean, I first learned about like story from like a picture book. I vividly remember some of the illustrations, the big picture book my mom got of like the Green Knight kind of coming and so on and so forth. The initial kind of encounter in King Arthur's, I'm being vague for spoiler reasons, but the initial encounter with King Arthur's knights at Christmas. So it's always kind of fascinating going in, being like, okay, I kind of know this story, I know the outlines. Like, there's going to be a lot of room for these people to kind of take it in different directions depending on what they're trying to do with this material. So I was very excited to see it, and I don't. I felt like I got what I kind of expected, but like you, it's a film that is deliberately trying to confound your sense of what is happening from scene to scene, from moment to moment. So you're kind of
Absolutely, and it's
yeah,
that is a great way to put it. And it's we're right there with Gawain, is played by Dev Patel. His large portions of the movie he doesn't really know what's going on. He's trying to figure it out himself. And we are confounded. I like that word a lot. And it's it has a really interesting way of, at least my reading of it was cutting in like visions or like almost daydreams that he's having or other characters are having around him. Specific moments where he is trying to remain vague, but he's lying on the ground and the camera kind of rotates around and comes back to him and shows him as a corpse, as just a skeleton in his clothing, and then it pans all the way back around again and comes back to him just lying there. And it's it's very slow, and by that technically it's very slow. The camera move, it's a full 360 pan, but it probably takes 25-30 seconds each time. And that's probably intentional. It also could have to do with how the staging had to happen, but it's very pensive. Like, it wants you to linger and it wants you to think about what you're seeing, in a very real way. And I mentioned this when we were chatting up during the pre-show, but I'm not familiar with David Lowery's work, and I can look up some his credits here while we're chatting. But like, early on in the movie, I kind of felt like it had a Robert Eggers vibe. Like it's very everything's very heavy. Like there's a really thick sense of dread. Um, even early, it's Christmas and everybody's happy. It's Christmas Day, but it's also it's cold and they're hungry. Um, they don't have what they need to sustain their kingdom really, and that's just really that kind of looms over that opening scene, even though they're celebrating. And that's really interesting to me, and it reminded me of The Witch in like really grim ways, and that's why I bring up Robert Eggers, who's a fantastic director, by the way, that everyone should look into. But what how hmm, how did you read the early chunk of the movie, and then we'll move officially into spoilers here in a minute when so we can get some more specific. But
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you. I agree with all of what you said. And as an aside, I'll mention that I had a series of similar thoughts where like A24 is like,
yeah,
I think they're at that point now where you can say that they have a house style in the way that like Warner Brothers and MGM back in the studio days used to have a house style.
and there's
The way
nothing
that
wrong with
Miramax,
there's nothing
like,
wrong with that at all.
oh no.
Yeah,
Oh, it's
they
great.
make a kind
Yeah.
of movie that works for them, and they're making money doing it. So that
No, and I love it. I am hopeful that they are able to kind of keep on that train for a while because I taught a course on independent film last semester at Iowa, and the thing that almost always happens at some point is these companies then just get like too kind of ensconced in what they're doing, and then that's when it all falls apart and somebody else has to come in. And so I'm hopeful that that doesn't happen for like another 10 or 15 years because I really also like how like we haven't really had a studio that has just sort of specialized in like making these kind of weird
right.
arty kind of movies that are still commercial enough that you don't have to like drive a million miles to go see them. Like they're
And
still pretty
it's
accessible.
interesting that it either of those things that this movie is a risk, and by that I mean it's kind of a high concept artsy approach to this to subject matter, but it's also it's a period piece and it's really expensive, and you can relatively expensive, um, just to adapt something that takes place in medieval or Arthurian days, whether or not it's a high concept art thing or it's Clive Owen's King Arthur. That either of those things is a financial risk. So it's fantastic that they got married such an interesting way, and that the movie was allowed to be made. So just props to A24 on that
No,
point. Yeah.
I completely agree with all of that because it felt. I mean, to your first question about like, okay, so how am I responding to that initial chunk of the movie? The thing that I thought was really interesting. Well, two things. One, it is a movie that is from the beginning relying very heavily on subjective narration, like as
Oh yeah.
opposed to objective narration. So it's
You're
like,
not an outsider watching this. You are. You're not inside. It's not first person ever, but you're inside Gawain's head for most of it, and you're kind of experiencing things the way that he is.
yeah, exactly. Which, and there are other versions of this story which kind of go in the opposite direction, and it's very externalized. Like you are not kind of experiencing the thoughts, emotions, dreams, hallucinations, visions, et cetera, that the main character is feeling. You're just kind of watching a heroic journey and epic events, much more kind of traditional kind of way of telling the story. So that was the first thing that really jumped out at me, was how they were kind of embracing the psychological kind of dimensions of the story as opposed to focusing exclusively on the external action. The other thing that was really striking was, and to your point about how it's marrying these different traditions, you've got like a real heavy influence, obviously, from Arthurian legends. Like it's very invested in kind of feeling like a retelling of something that is very old and ancient. but it felt very cinematic in what it was kind of drawing from. Like, you know, it's pulling very heavily, as you mentioned, from like the high concept kind of fantasy tradition. It wants to be, you know, enjoyable to viewers who have really missed the experience of seeing something like Lord of the Rings in a theater.
But
But
it's
it
it's
also,
different than that.
yeah,
But
oh,
you're
very different,
yeah,
very
yeah. I mean,
different.
and it's not to say that like things like cinematography and Lord of the Rings aren't, it's a the Fellowship of the Ring is a masterclass in cinematography, but it's I don't I, it's the feeling of like gloom is just it's so thick in every shot. Like, and that is it's gonna be hard for some people to get through just on that note, because very like, okay, they're celebrating Christmas Day, but it also somehow feels like there's not going to be another Christmas. It's just on that. Like, it would probably be a hard movie for people to get through. You know what I mean? Like, so it's even without
I mean,
any of the hallucination stuff. It's really two things that could clash that are just expertly woven together in a really interesting way. And like I
well,
said,
and
they're
I
both risky.
Oh, it's very risky. And I mean, the thing that really, I mean, this is one of those movies, honestly, like the first shot, you know, of this film, or really any film, can tell you a lot about what the movie is doing. But this, I would be willing to say that if you're kind of going into this, if you're watching this, you should watch it in the theater if at all possible. But if you're watching it on streaming, well after the fact, just watch the first shot, and I think you will know, immediately whether or not you are interested in this film, because it's just opening on this, very simple kind of establishing shot of a barn. But if you're like looking at this shot carefully, which it wants you to do, because it kind of holds the shot, it kind of
Like,
lingers.
and it doesn't,
You're
like, it's as I remember, it's moving, but it's not moving very fast. So it's like it's really giving you time to soak in a lot of detail on it.
Exactly. And it really wants you to kind of notice, like the snow on the thatched roof. It wants you to kind of be like attending to the barnyard animals. It is very much kind of a moment in the movie where it's saying, like, this is going to be an environment where you kind of lose yourself in, which is something that, again, going back to, where people are going to be watching this, if at all possible, this is a movie that should be seen in the theater, because it's trying to kind of recapture that, even just kind of beyond sort of like the things that are happening in the story. Just the experience of the film is trying to kind of call back to this sort of hushed environment, this kind of ritualized sort of tone of mind. Like, it's not trying to be, kind of in the normal film where you're going in there and you're going to be overwhelmed with like stuff and you're thinking like what's happening next. It kind of wants you to be in a very kind of contemplated, almost like meditative sort of state of mind. And I think you're getting that, like, from those kind of opening moments, with just sort of like seeing detail and texture. And I think those moments you were citing earlier with like the weird pans and some of that is there to kind of remind you, like, this is your mindset needs to be different for this kind of film than it does for, like Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, despite the
Absolutely,
superficial similarities in content.
and that's true. And it's
So
um from very early, like it's really immersive, I want to say. And and that is something that can be said about Lord of the Rings. Put popular fantasy is the way I would describe it. But it's those other it's so different. Like, I can't describe that. Even it's different from other fantasy films and other historical movies of us, like, of
right.
just so. And you can say there are similar ones. The I get you could say like Braveheart is from a similar time period. It's probably 500 years one way or the other, but like Dark Ages kind of movies. Um, the what comes to mind is like Ridley Scott's Robin Hood with Russell Crowe, which I don't think is very good, but
No, that is
no,
so
but
bad.
it's
But the texture is very similar. Like
yeah,
the gloom
and
and
it's
and the
it's
thickness is similar.
and everything's gross, but it's not, it this the Green Knight executes some of those ideas a lot better than a lot of other films that are trying to go for the same thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I'll just kind of add that I think the thing that it's drawing on, and I also have not seen any David Lowery films, so
I was
I
just looking. Sorry, continue while I
oh
pull up
yeah,
the
no,
list.
I know he did. I looked him up too. They're like it's like Ghost Story, like Pete's Dragon, some stuff
Pete
that looks
Pete's Dragon
really
is the one
interesting.
that I've seen. I liked it. I didn't I I didn't love it. Um, the I also see Ain't Them Body Saints, which I haven't seen, but um, apparently was very interesting. So that's it's on the list for sure. After having seen this,
Right. Right. Well, I would love to dive into his filmography more at some point, but I am willing to bet, based on this film alone, that he is he's probably a big Criterion guy. Like, I'm sure he is like really, really into art cinema. Because I
oh
have
yeah,
to say, that opening shot reminded me of a movie I did not expect to be thinking about when I was watching this film, which is actually the last film I saw in Rochester. I went, in the George Eastman Museum in Rochester, New York, before I moved to Iowa, and then again to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But it was they did a screening of Bellatar's Satan Tango, which is like this 7.5 hour like magnum opus, like very, very long, slow, arty film. It is almost never screened because it's 7.5 hours, and it's like there's just no way to make money off of it. So I was like, the last film I got to see was really, really great, really special. But the opening shots of these two films are virtually identical. Like, that
oh
film
yeah.
also, it's not a medieval film. It's like a film that takes place in like rural Belgium,
Okay.
not rural Belgium, like rural kind of Central Europe. And you also open with like a shot of a barn, and it's holding the shot of the barn for like 5-6 minutes, like, because again, it's a 7.5 hour movie. It's really kind of
Nothing
soaking.
happens fast.
No, exactly. And this film is 2 hours, 10 minutes. It's not trying to do like you're gonna be in this movie all day, like experiencing this world. Like, this is but it's trying to do that within the 2.5 hour kind of time limit. And in that opening shot, even though it's only like a minute long, probably if you timed it, like, it's showing you that this is going to be pulling from the art film kind of tradition in the rhythm of the film, for lack of a better way of describing it. Like, it's going to be
Rhythm.
a slow movie.
The
Yeah, go ahead.
I do want to touch on the pace, and rhythm's a good way to put it too. If you and even I had some of this expectation after the trailer. You see these. You always kind of expect with a medieval film that there's going to be some kind of big battle scene in the third act. And we don't get that. It's this movie is I'm going to say deliberately paced. I definitely don't think it's too slow. It's just it's designed very thoroughly and it moves from point to point it's just not very fast. But there is there's not a big center action set piece in this movie, and I think that's fantastic. It's
Yeah. Oh,
no,
oh
yeah,
yeah,
um,
completely.
and it's really setting itself apart. You there are hints about what kind of film it is in those trailers. I hate to keep harping on the trailer, but it was I just watched the trailer yesterday to get ready for this, and I was, oh yeah, this and that. So it's very even the trailer's very different now that I see how the film was cut together. But the 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 pace is it's very different than probably anything most people have ever seen. Um, and not to say that it doesn't have its high point, but he has to go on this long journey. He doesn't know how far he has to go, and he just takes it one step at a time. Um, and one more kind of general note, um, the the color in this movie is very interesting. From that from that very first shot you keep talking about, there's a lot of gray and brown. It's very it's a lot of the film is very drab. The first real pop of color is when the Green Knight first arrives, and he's this really vibrant, like almost ethereal. Like he's in theory made of wood, or he's wearing a wooden bodice or like vestige, but it's instead of looking, it has the texture of tree bark, but it's this really unusual green tone. Um, and that's and then the next thing I really noticed with the color is he's Gawain's on his horse and he's walking across this big field and he meets that little fellow, but he's got this like golden cloak on, which I was certain had like some major significance, and it turns out no. But he's riding on a horse and everything in the shot is brown or gray except for this gold cloak. So it's like, what? Did maybe I missed something? But there's I know it's intentional, and there's something he's trying to tell us through each of the as he moves through the color palette of the movie. It stays fairly static, but there are scenes that get really vibrant. Near the end of the second act, he stays with this lord and lady, and their house has this really lush blue kind of color. But as soon as he leaves, he goes back out in the wilderness, and it's all brown. And it's
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's really, really. I hadn't really thought about that before. And then the one that really jumped out to me, just to kind of round out the list, was when he's visiting the abandoned house and he has to dive into the lake, and then all of a sudden,
I'm throwing the spoiler button. All right.
Okay.
So we no longer have okay. Yeah. Everybody here on out, we're we like the movie. It's definitely unusual, and for that we think if you're interested in art film, if you like A24's other work, you should definitely check it out. But here on out, you should just assume that we're going to talk about anything we want without restraint. So yeah, I'm sorry, Dan, go ahead.
No, great. No, this means I can give all the dirt. But so when he's diving into the water looking for that lady's head, and the color gets like suddenly it's bright red.
Yeah,
this overwhelming kind of red. And so, I mean, you're right. Like this film this is where I think it is pulling, where I'm like, okay, he's definitely watched like these Andrei Tarkovsky films, these Béla Tarr films, because he is using color. I don't know. I'm sure there might be some symbolic. I mean, we really kind of like knocked it around. We could probably come up with some sort of symbolic sort of meaning to it. But it also it's a movie that's really just in love with like what cinema can kind of do as a medium, and one of the things it can do is it can show us really wonderful colors.
That's true, really, and the fact that the prevailing color palette is so kind of drab, like it makes it so we notice when there's a big difference. Yeah, I'm adjusting my light there. Yeah. So when the Christmas party, everything's brown and gray. Then the Green Knight walks in, and obviously he's what's he doing here? He's kind of weird. So all the characters are drawn to him, but it's the first dramatic color in the movie is the green, and then the golden on that cloak, and then the red underwater, and the blue in the house, and then he finally reaches the Green Knight's the Green Chapel, I think is what they called it in the film, but the surrounding nature is like it kind of goes from dead winter kind of colors to more of a yellow orange kind of palette of fall. So and they always return to the drab before they move on to the next one. So it almost makes it stand out all the more. Because if the movie was colorful from the first moment, you wouldn't notice if there was a change necessarily, but because the contrast is so stark, which has got to be on purpose, and it's telling us that something isn't right with each of these places, and the question is it in Gawain's head, or are the Lord and Lady just crazy? Is Erin Kellyman's character, the woman you mentioned, who he sleeps in her house. He finds an abandoned cottage in the woods, and he's cold, and he's like, all right, nobody's here, I'm going to sleep here. And he's shaken awake by a young woman played by Erin Kellyman from Star Wars and from The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the Disney Plus show. And is she even really there? She's she keeps saying, "It looks like my head's here, but it's actually in the pond." And he goes and dives in the pond, and every the water is bright red, like it's like blood red. Um, and he finds her skull and brings it back up, and she's gone. And he goes and finds her corpse in the bed where he was sleeping moments before. Um, and it begins in the and it's very dark in this scene too. So it's like the only color you see is gray, and then it goes through the bright red scene, and then it comes back out, and it's very drab. Um, so which part of that, as it it picks up the pace and slows down, and it becomes vibrant and dies out. Like, what is actually happening to him, and what is he hallucinating?
Right, right. And I think the wonderful thing about the film is it's designed in such a way where you really can't you're just not given enough information to conclusively answer that
Right. I mean, and
question one way
he
or the
could
other.
Aaron Kellyman could legitimately be a specter. Like he could be talking. She could,
Right,
I absolutely wouldn't put it past this movie for there to be a ghost standing there, but
right,
it's not clear. And it's, he's trying to figure it out as much as you are. And that's,
right.
um, it's admirable for a filmmaker to take that risk, in my opinion.
I completely agree. And I think one of the things that's interesting about some of these decisions is it feels like an attempt on to kind of preserve the strangeness of the original story, because anytime you're reading like one of these old kind of myths, you're dealing with several different kinds of strangeness. You're looking at a culture that is very remote from our own. You're talking about media of transmission, whether it's like written as a poem or kind of orally kind of spoken around a fire late at night. Like the medium of transmission is so different.
Oh yeah.
And whatever has been lost, whether it's like fragments of the text or context or intention, we don't know. A lot of times, like, I mean, the film literally kind of tells you this is a story based on a poem written by an anonymous poet. Like
Right.
it literally foregrounds that in the credits. And so one way to kind of deal with all of that, if you're adapting a story, is to like fill in all of those gaps and try to like explain, oh, okay, well, this is missing, we don't know this, let's like do it this way so it'll make more sense to the audience. And this film certainly does some of that. I think some of these devices are, they're coming from like, medieval movies, art films, Hollywood films that are familiar to some segment of the audience. But more often than not, it's not really trying to explain everything, because it wants you to kind of have that feeling of strangeness that you would get if you were to try to sit down and kind of like study this actual like poem, and that's what I really loved about it, because that is not the easy sell if you're like trying to make this movie and you're
Absolutely.
like
No.
saying,
Yeah. Like, how do
make it weird.
I'm curious what the pitch meeting for this is like, but
Yeah, right.
and it's really interesting to bring up the way that old stories like this are transmitted, because what is lost and what is changed every time it's told. If it comes from an oral tradition, the story probably existed for 500 years before anyone thought to write it down. And if anyone's ever played the telephone game at the lunch table in elementary school, even one sentence changes dramatically when 10 different people try to translate it. So and this is just like, I would say this is just another translation of the Green Knight. The film is just another translation of an ancient story that people have been trying to crack for centuries.
No, yeah, completely. And then I'll throw in one more film
Yeah,
reference
please.
that I think that I would be willing to say that David Lowery has seen this movie, because it's very famous. But in the late '60s, Federico Fellini, he did pretty much the same thing, where he wanted to kind of take this very fragmentary story, I think by Plutarch. It's like a very similar kind of old poem from an ancient culture, And it's just kind of a series of very strange episodes. And the very last shot of the film is basically a dissolve from the characters to just like these paintings of these characters. They're very faded, it's fragmented. Like he pulls back, you see that it's like, oh, there's one rock over here with these characters, one rock over here with paintings of these characters. And this is what we've been seeing. We've been seeing a deliberately fragmentary, episodic adaptation of a text which is fragmentary, incomplete. And the Green Knight is doing something very similar. It doesn't quite have something quite so kind of in your face arty as that moment from Satyricon that I described. But I think the fact that the credits are kind of even foregrounding, like, this is, like literally, I think the text says something to the effect of, this is an adaptation of a 14th century poem by Anonymous. And
Excellent.
it's, it's like that thing, Dan.
The same text at the start of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very, very like it is from the beginning kind of telling you like this is going to be very contemplative, very ritualistic, very mysterious, and it is going to deliberately kind of preserve strangeness, ambiguity, because it wants you to kind of be like actively engaged with it. I mean, like this is the fun of this movie, is that you get to kind of be asking yourself with the characters you're putting it, like, what is real? Like, is this a ghost? Is this a hallucination of a ghost? Like the fact that there's like, those are the choices. I mean, that's really wonderful. It's really wonderful exercise as a viewer to kind of be asked to think about, characters and a world in those ways. It's just not what you normally get from movies, most of the time.
It's true. And this, if you say even that a film is, it's a King Arthur story, it's probably how a lot of people would describe this. I wouldn't necessarily say that's all too accurate, but like, is the king is not named in the, they refer to him as the king, and he's credited as the king, and that the actor is Sean Harris, who's been a villain in Mission Impossible. He's been in some other kind of other interesting films, but it's the King Arthur. He's not the main character here, obviously, but also, it's surprising. It's what surprised me is that he's a kind of an old, sickly guy. He's not. Arthur may have once been this incredible warrior that he's famous for, but he's an old bearded guy, and his wife, who I presume is Guinevere, is looks even more ill than he does. And she's was it Kate Dickie? Yeah. She's from Game of Thrones primarily, and it's just even the expectation that one goes in knowing that it is a translated King Arthur story are completely defied by the movie, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. I know. I loved how King Arthur was used. I did not catch that they didn't name him, but now that you're pointing that out, I think that's just.
I mean, and it's so I presume it's King Arthur, not just knowing the story,
Right.
But it's not. No one in the movie says Arthur, and he's not credited as King Arthur. He's credited as the king.
Right. I remember Terrence Malick did the exact same thing in The New World, where he doesn't tell you it's Pocahontas, and it's obviously Pocahontas.
Right.
And it's such an easy way.
I might have to revisit that one, but I feel like we discussed it years ago, and I think we have differing opinions on it.
It's my opinion has changed on Terrence Malick as he keeps making movies. I'll tell you that. That might be the one where I'm like, he should have stopped.
That's fair. That's a conversation for another episode.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But either way, in this film particularly, the use of King Arthur, not kind of telling you that that's him. He's just got such a presence. Those opening scenes with him do such a great job of establishing.
Everyone reveres him, and it's not but it's not clear why, but it doesn't need to be, because it's not important to this story. Everyone's the king, and everyone respects him. Like they're not out to dethrone him or anything. They're all there because they want to be. But it's obvious. The movie and the story are about Gawain, and he's sent on this quest uh, ostensibly by King Arthur, because he tells him a story of the Green Knight, and the Green Knight arrives, um, and then that sets things in motion. Um, but
Well, this is the other thing that's kind
yeah,
of
please.
interesting about the adaptation of this story, which
And I'm
is,
not I'm not super familiar with the other story, other than a synopsis that I've read. I haven't read a real translation of it. So that's good.
yeah,
Please
it's
continue.
been a long time for me. So I have a lot of friends who study medieval literature. So any of them, if I'm making any mistakes, just go ahead and shoot me emails, Facebook messages, and and I'll put out corrections somehow, some way. But what's just interesting kind of ways that things adapt other things. I can say that like sometimes when you have a film version of a book or a play or whatever, the film is actively trying to kind of be like they don't usually say this out loud, but like they're trying to like kind of replace, in a certain sense, the book. Like they're trying to
Yeah.
sort of be this completely self-contained, like this is the thing English teachers in high school always hate. It's like, oh, the movie is positioning itself as the thing that you can watch so you don't have to read whatever
Right.
book
And
is.
that's never the case, but
Right, exactly. And this film, what it's doing is it's by preserving these gaps and these strange kind of moments. And then again with that very unusual kind of title sequence where it's foregrounding its sources. I mean, these are all kind of signals that this is not a film that is meant to kind of supplant, the source material or stand alone. It is very much meant to be read in a complementary way. Like the idea, I think very much is to read the translation, watch this film, read the translation again, and kind of like consider how they're intersecting rather than kind of seeing them as like isolated,
right.
self-contained kind of objects. And that is also kind of not the normal way of making a film, because normally the idea is the film should be the self-contained, should be completely kind of standalone, and you don't really have adapters kind of saying no, we want people to be kind of like this would be a great film to teach in a class, because it's like actively encouraging us as viewers to be like, we know this is King Arthur because we have read this story, and we're going to be kind of filling in, we're going to be reading these things kind of alongside each other, at least at some point.
Right. And that's really, so maybe I would get more out of it if I took the time to read. So I'll see if I can get my hand on the story for sure. Um,
Right.
Sitting down to read is becoming harder and harder
Oh, I know, tell me about it.
as time passes. And
Right.
I don't know if it's because of my attention span or because life is more complicated, but um,
It's tough. I got a lot of reading done the first part of the year before my daughter is born, but now I'm back to
congratulations,
TV
by the way.
because, oh,
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, she's a month old, so she's kicking and doing all that good stuff.
excellent.
But yeah, now I'm just watching a lot of HBO because I can do that when I'm holding her, but reading is
Right.
something that I
That
can
takes two
only do.
hands.
Yeah, exactly. So when she's a little older, I'll get back into to reading. But I can tell you, I am really looking forward to, on the basis of this film, kind of reading some of those old storybooks that I have somewhere about like this, and then showing her like maybe a slightly edited version of this film. Because aside from a couple of moments of kind of violence and sexuality, it's a film that would actually, I think, really work well for a lot of different age groups, among its other advantages, because it's just so, I think that sense of mystery that the
Mhm.
film creates, which is really the thing I think we're coming back to over and over again. So all these different strategies to kind
And
of create.
the devil's in the details, which like it's executed very
Yeah.
very well. A lot of other films attempt that kind of thing and fall way short.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. Like when, just singling out like the opening shot and some of these other moments, it's just there's so much attention to the texture of each shot. Like this is one of those films, like, I'll use the reviewing cliche of saying every shot could be a photograph, but it
Right.
really
It's
is like,
brilliantly composed.
oh yeah, and and that's the thing. That's why I'm kind of wondering how it'll play when it hits the streaming services, because it really feels like it demands kind of the theater environment. It really feels like what it's trying to do is sort of go back to that kind of older sort of like art film tradition where the effect is kind of inseparable from the fact that you've set out some time from your day to kind of go sit in a darkened theater with strangers and kind of think about, weird stuff that you don't normally think about. It's not something that you really can easily do on streaming, because I feel like the whole ethos of streaming is like you're playing this on the TV and there's like probably six other things happening
I
around you.
it's funny you say that. My wife and I watch a lot of shows together, but often I will like well have something on the big screen. Just got my hand caught in my cable here. And then I will be like playing a video game on my laptop and muted, so I'm only half paying attention to both of them. And that's just
right,
that has
exactly.
become life during quarantine. And that's not always the case. If something really special is coming out, then we make it a point to sit down together and watch. But it's that's most of my gaming happens these days while I'm also doing something else.
Oh yeah, no, same. I'll have like baseball on the TV, like jazz playing on the speakers, and I'll play Skyrim on my Switch.
Excellent.
My daughter will be like crocked in my arm. So it's and that's fascinating because you're seeing a lot of this is another discussion for another show, but you're seeing, I think, a lot of media kind of cater to that, and
Yeah.
sort of actively or not so actively kind of recognizing that viewers are effectively all distracted viewers on some level at this point. And so it was really, really refreshing to just, and again, some of this is just informed by like me just being in the house for, 18 months and now having a little baby, but like just walking to the theater, kind of sitting down, kind of like clearing my head, sitting in the darkened space, sort of allowing kind of the color to sort of wash over me, kind of
Yeah,
having
this
these moments.
it was so like I've missed it so much, Dan. And it's yes, and this was. I wish this had been the first movie that I saw back in theaters, because it's like what I mentioned before. Like, it's so immersive, and it has it has such a clear vision, and the visual and the writing and the rhythm and like even the sound design. Like, it has a very I don't want to say like ethereal musical score, because it definitely like there's definitely some moments where the melody really comes out, but it's uh relatively few, and when it does, it's beautiful. The the music kind of shows that not everything in this world is this just how they live, and that hope exists even though you can have these joyful sounds even in this world that seems so doom and gloom, just because that that's how they live. And it's not even that it's not that the music that's playing in your ears is being heard by the characters, but it's just showing you that they happiness can be found in this place. Horror can be found. Confusion can certainly be found, as we've been just talking about for almost an hour. But there's so many layers to it.
Yeah, no, and I love the sound design. I've been watching some David Lynch films recently.
Oh yeah,
So I watched The Elephant Man the other morning, and just was
with
marveling at,
John Hurt, right?
John Hurt.
You can't even
John
tell
Hurt
it's
and
him.
Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's a really, really great movie. Good to rewatch at any time. But the sound design in this film, had that kind of Lynchian quality in, first of all, just how, like layered it is. Like, very, very few filmmakers seem to like remember that there's sound. It's like, it's so easy to kind of like go to the visuals. That's where cinema has its start. And a lot of people are still kind of like welded to that idea that it's a visual medium, which it is obviously, but like, the sound is so often kind of just relegated to this sort of illustrative role in so many films, and this is one where it's using sound very much like you're describing how color is being used, where like it's trying to kind of, in addition to just giving you information about the world and the story and the dialogue, etc., there is a kind of poetic sort of cadence to how the sound sort of rises and falls. So I mean, that's kind of what a lot of what was sort of strange about this film is it just kind of felt like it was trying to pull out some of the poetic kind of qualities of cinema that often get subordinated to narrative or like what's happening next. And it was just kind of allowing you as a viewer to be like, wow, these are some really wonderful sounds, that we're hearing. Like this is some really beautiful,
And
striking.
even when it should be something, or it seems like it should be something so simple, let the scene where he first departs and he's riding on his horse, and there's activity outside the city walls. There are people that come talk to him, and there's farmers and stuff that he's passing by. But like, even it's a long shot. Like it probably goes for 3 or 4 minutes, and he's just riding down this road, passing all of this activity that's kind of mostly happening on the distance. But just like what stood out to me was the horseshoes. Like the steps of the horse are so present in the mix. It's like I am walking, and it's so, that sounds so drab to say that he's walking, but it's a big deal. It's this
Right.
almost echo. A horse has 4 feet. You hear twice as many footsteps as you would if he was just walking in his boots, and it's just so present in the mix that it's telling you it's a big deal that he is riding his horse somewhere that he doesn't know, and it's just such a subtle little thing. You know what I mean? Like it's just that it's probably the same or a very similar horse track sound that has been in any other movie there's ever been a horse, but it's the primary sound that you're hearing for like several minutes. Like
Right. No, that's a perfect example, and that shot is if I'm thinking of the same one you're thinking of, is really wonderful.
It's just like it,
leaving.
maybe not immediately after, but it's very shortly after he leaves the city wall, and it's he's walking toward the camera on his horse, and we're dollying back, and he probably goes for half a mile, and it's 3 or 4 minutes long, and it's really, he's just moseying, and it's kind of leaving everything he knows behind, and it's just the clip clop of the horse. It just goes and goes and goes.
That's where I think that David Lowery may very well have been at that Satan Tango screening that I saw, because like that film is like 50% just shots of people walking down the road, and you're hearing like the sounds of like horse hoofs and like wagon wheels kind of turning. But no, you're absolutely right. That's the kind of thing that most movies would not hold that shot of him just kind of walking on the road.
Right. I mean, and I do like, I feel like he takes a moment here or there. He says hello to somebody. There's other activity happening, but the main thing is that he's walking away, and his home is shrinking behind him.
Right.
And it's just really... the act of travel is what's important there, and it's the sound is there to accentuate that.
Right, exactly. Like, and it's the kind of thing you wouldn't have that shot in another film which is more narrative focused, would say, we only need to show you like the first bit of this, and then we'll cut because now the audience has got the point, or they just like don't even show it at all. They just go to the next scene. So that's the first thing it's doing differently. And then the second thing it's doing differently is it's not just being like, all right, pull the horse, who's from the stock library, throw him on there, they'll get the point. It's really kind of attending to these minute details. And every shot has something like that in it. Like every shot you can
absolutely
tell there's like, all right, what is the sensual kind of detail, like visually, audio, like you get the real sense that they are trying, as filmmakers occasionally do, to get to the point where you can kind of like smell the environment, like it feels like it's trying to do like a synesthesia kind of thing at times, where you're like I can't smell this, but I almost feel like I could, because all the other senses are being stimulated, in one way, shape, or form.
There's one more thing that I want to hit on before we wrap up, and if there's anything specific you'd like to talk about, we can do that. But like, there's a couple of times in the movie where these hallucinations or visions or like daydreams he's having are very focused on, what could, based on the situation I'm in, what could happen to me. And the movie has a couple of like various subtle ways of showing that that's kind of what's happening. But like I mentioned earlier, there's and I can go into a little bit more detail now. He meets a kid on the road who gives him directions, and the kid kind of greedily asks for a coin. Is like, all right, whatever. He tosses him some, but then he gets jumped in the woods where the kid told him to go. So it turns out that he was just leading him to his buddies so they could rob him. But so they tie him up and leave him in the dirt. And there's that long shot. There's, it probably takes 30 seconds to do a full 360 pan to come back around to where he's lying, and it's a skeleton in his armor. And then it does the set, it keeps turning and comes all the way back around, takes another 20 seconds, and he's lying there. He's like, okay, that's a moment of realizing, all right, I did something stupid, and this could be where it all ends. And it kind of foreshadows later on in the movie. He eventually does find the Green Knight, and they have a brief exchange, and then, and one thing we haven't talked about is the sash that theoretically makes him invincible. But he has a brief exchange with the Green Knight, and then the Green Knight, the pact they made at the beginning of the movie basically said, you're going to come find me and I'm going to kill you. There's more to it than that, but that's the quest, and the point of his quest was to go there and to come back, proving that he could survive it, basically. And then the last chunk of the movie, briefly pinging back on the sound design, is he travels back home. The king has become ill, and he and his wife both pass. And then Gawain is the heir apparent because Arthur doesn't have any children. He's a sister's son, so it's vaguely related, but he's the next one in line of succession or what have you. So he becomes the king. And then he kind of spurns his lady that we haven't talked about, Essel, played by the very, very talented Alicia Vikander. And they have a baby, but he doesn't, he's the king now, and he can't be seen having a child with a lowborn woman. So he spurns her, and he marries a beautiful young noblewoman, and they have a child, and then he's a terrible king. And then as later on, there's a rebellion, and they come in for him, and then so he takes off the magic sash. He decides that it's all over. There's no way out of this, so he takes off the magic sash. And it turns out that the Green Knight had tried to decapitate him, and his head falls off and rolls away. And the major thing there is obviously that there's no dialogue through that whole sequence, and it is not an insignificant amount of the runtime.
It's like 10 or it feels like 10 or even 15 minutes.
Yes, and there's no, and it's you notice after a minute or two, all right, nobody's saying anything. So there's, he tells you very early on with that simple fact that something isn't right here. And maybe this is my first thought was maybe Gawain's realized that he's made a huge mistake. But, obviously later on they reveal that it was just, it's another vision he was having. It's like, okay, if I am actually invincible while I'm wearing this magic piece of clothing, like what happens if I do go back? Am I as pure? Am I as honorable a man as we all know King Arthur is? And he, in that moment, for better or worse, kind of decides that he's not. So is it worth me trying to go back to prove all this to everyone when I know it's not true? And maybe he's just in his own head. He's absolutely in his own head. And there's obviously a chance it wouldn't turn out anything like that, and he could be a great king, and he's just afraid of what he might become. But that fear he takes off the magic sash, and he says, I forget exactly what he says to the Green Knight, but it's, all right, I'm ready. And then the Green Knight says something like, well, off with your head, and the movie's over.
It's interesting because I'm completely with you. I think that's like exactly what's going on. He's having kind of like, a death kind of vision, sort of questioning whether or not he's worth it. and he realizes that, like he doesn't need, this magic sash, which is basically like this crux, this kind of like cloak of invulnerability that he's wearing.
Exactly.
And so he takes it off and he says, I'm ready. And then the knight is like, nice job. He
Right.
like he kneels
You
down.
learned what I
And
was trying to teach you.
yeah, right. And that's the fascinating thing. You were saying earlier, like there's no like big kind of action climax. What you get is like, a psychological kind of action climax. You get
Yeah.
basically an extended sequence where, as you're really like, eloquently describing, he's like wrestling with his own kind of internal demons about like who he is and what kind of person he wants to be, what kind of knight he wants to be.
What kind he wants to be versus the person that he thinks he is. There's a
Right.
I would want to touch briefly with the Essel character. There's a bit early on in the film where it's just like, okay, are you ever going to make me your lady? And it's like he knows he can't do that, and it's just because he's a man of status, and she is unfortunately not. And it's if he is to become the king, he can't marry this poor woman who lives in a commune. So it's and then but his fear is that he goes back and then he allows that situation to escalate beyond his control, and it gets as bad as it can possibly get. So it's a question of what could happen, what am I going to allow to happen, am I worthy of the quest I've been sent on? Can I be the king that all of the people expect and deserve because of the king that King Arthur was?
Right. And this is a great place to just kind of, I think, hammer home one more time, just sort of some of the themes that we've been talking about.
Absolutely.
That is, that's exactly what every fantasy movie like ever is doing for the most part. Like, I mean, that's Lord of the Rings.
No, yeah, that's Aragorn's whole arc is there's this thing looming over me that I never wanted. Can I live up to it?
Right. And, Frodo as well, like I got to take the ring to Mount Doom. And, Tolkien is drawing on these Arthurian legends. So that's why that's there.
Absolutely.
But like a lot of the times, the traditional kind of Hollywood way of telling those stories is, again, objective narration. You're conveying those questions through action, through, like Frodo makes it to Mount Doom, drops the ring in, like that. The quest of the three films is how you see that process kind of coming to fruition. It's rare to see a film in this genre so kind of so openly kind of like put that action inside somebody's mind. That's sort of the interesting thing. I can't really say I've seen another film using, this kind of setting and this sort of story doing. And I think maybe just because like there's so much money kind of involved in like getting those costumes together that there's like a strong pressure to like do cool stuff with it. It's just like that's just sort of where people just inevitably go. And so that was what I found so striking is that you're getting some battle scenes, you're getting some of that very traditional stuff, but it's so psychological and so
and it's the specifics of it aren't all that important. Like it's more about his internalization of the journey than what's happening outside the gate. So to speak.
Exactly. And that's just so fascinating. It's just like you see it's like we've seen plenty of like movies where, it turns out like it's all in the main character's head, but normally, they're like small little movies with like, like Darren Aronofsky's Pi comes to mind for some strange reason. Like really small movies where it's like, oh, this guy's obviously crazy. He's locked in a room. He's having visions. And it's very, very interesting to see, this is the A24 kind of touch, if, because I feel like I see them doing similar things all the time. They're taking very, familiar kind of generic material, but then they're sort of giving you the mind bender, twisty kind of version of it too. So it was great. I loved how it ended. I mean, that's probably the place where I feel like a lot of people listening to this might have a lot of different opinions about the ending of this film, but
I mean, and it really kind of like it leaves it up in the air too. We don't know if the Green Knight kills him or not. We just know that, like I said before, the whole point of this quest was because you need to learn. There's a lesson you need to learn in order to be king, and you have learned it. Um, but you know, in the at the beginning of the movie, he promises that he's going to kill him. So do we? We don't know that that happens or not because the movie ends before we get there.
Right.
Yeah,
right, yeah. It's and that's you know, one more great little detail. It's just like, yeah, like, does he go back to King Arthur's you know, kingdom? Does he just kind of keep traveling, kind of become like a wandering sort of knight? Does the Green Knight kill him? Do they just like hang out together? You know, like, what do they do? It's completely open, and that's wonderful. It's one more time the movie is not answering your questions. You know. And
Absolutely.
That's great. I love it when movies don't answer my questions.
Is there anything else you would like to touch on before we wrap up?
Nope. I feel like I have said all the thoughts I had while I was watching it, so I'm good.
Excellent. So in that case, I'd just like to thank everybody for watching. If you've been hanging out with us for an hour, that's amazing. Dan and I both really enjoyed The Green Knight. It was a huge surprise to me. Very different than the movie I expected to get, and almost always a joy. Sometimes it's, you know, I don't want to bring up the times it's a disappointment, but anyway, yeah, this is, my name is Brandon. This has been Into 25 Reviews, and hoping to come back next week with a chat about the Suicide Squad with the director buddy. So keep an eye out for that. Hit that subscribe button, ring that bell if you want to know when we got a new episode up. Thanks, guys.